Hey, good evening, everyone. Let's get started. My name is Shanice Naidu Jimenez, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. I already saw that at least one of you saw the Q&A function for this webinar, which is excellent. If at any point you have any questions, feel free to use that window to type out your question and we'll get back to you. For this particular session, I don't believe your mics are active or live. I think only the panelists can communicate using the mics. But like I said, if you have any questions or any comments, feel free to use the Q&A window. I can't wait to get started to learn more about this exciting, informative session about voter registration, voting rights. But before we begin, I just want to thank and acknowledge all of the sponsors and collaborators that helped put this event together this evening. So thank you so much to the committee that I'm actually chair of, New York City Bar Association Diversity Pipeline Initiatives Committee, as well as the Election Law Committee, Centro Cívico Cultural Dominican Bar Association, Generations to Citizen, Latino Justice, PRLDF, League of Women Voters, NYC, the New York City Census 2020, the New York Immigration Coalition, and the South Asian Bar Association of New York. So many people are here because there's so much knowledge and this is very important work and we can't wait to get started. But one final thank you I have to give is to Hazel Weiser and to Catherine Loving, who were both incredibly integral in putting this event together this evening. So without further introduction, I now turn my attention to Ms. Loving. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanice. And I just want to also welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We have a wonderful lineup of speakers for you. And I'm Catherine Loving. I'm chair of the Election Law Committee of the New York City Bar Association. While I do work for the city, of course, I'm speaking for myself tonight and not for the city or for my agency. And now I'd like to introduce to you, we're so happy to have, of course, Hazel Weiser of the League of Women Voters of New York City.
Good evening, everybody. I want to talk about how we can best make sure that cynicism and despair don't discourage voters from going to the polls. By registering to vote and voting, you take action against cynicism and despair. As a follow-up to tonight's program, on September 17th from 4:30 to 6:30, you're invited to participate in a second training on how to run a voter registration drive in your own community. Links will be emailed to you so that you can sign up for that program. But let's look, there are 4 factors that contribute to distrust in the fairness and accuracy of the American voting system. The first is voter suppression. The second is pockets of incompetence in election administration. The third is foreign and domestic dirty tricks. And fourth is incendiary rhetoric. So let's briefly look at each one of these. Let's start with voter suppression. America has a long and vicious history of suppressing the votes of African Americans, immigrants, women, poor people, and formerly incarcerated. And here in New York, of suppressing access to the ballot by citizens of Puerto Rican descent. However, in 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which significantly removed barriers to voting, especially in the South, where poll taxes and literacy tests, all part of Jim Crow, had locked out many Black voters. However, despite the fact that the Voting Rights Act is probably the most successful piece of legislation ever passed by the United States Congress, in 2013, the United States Supreme Court defanged an important aspect of the Voting Rights Act in a case called Shelby County versus Holder. To protect voting rights, individual lawsuits now have to be filed to prevent onerous voting laws from curtailing eligibility to register and vote. That places enormous strain on nonprofit organizations like Latino Justice, the League of Women Voters, the ACLU, the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP, whereas previously the Department of Justice a federal agency, analyzed the impact of any new laws and prevented implementation when they were found to be too onerous. So the responsibility and cost of enforcement of the Voting Rights Act went from the federal government to private parties. And the 2016 presidential election was the first without the protections of the Voting Rights Act pre-clearance provision. According to the Brennan Center survey, 25 states enacted new restrictions on voting and registration from 2010 to 2018. Much of this new wave of restrictive voting laws began with claims of widespread and systematic voter fraud, especially non-citizen voting and imposter voters taking on the identities of dead people whose names remain on the voter rolls. These claims are false. There is no evidence of widespread or even occasional voter fraud. So that's the first factor. The second factor is pockets of incompetence in election administration that can then be turned into conspiracy theories that are spread on Twitter or Facebook. And we had an incident here in New York in the June 23rd primary. The Brooklyn Board of Elections didn't order enough absentee ballots despite the COVID pandemic. And they ended up mailing out over 34,000 absentee ballots the day before the primary. So of course, thousands of ballots were postmarked too late, or in some instances were not postmarked at all, resulting in disqualifying. That unfortunately gets transferred into bizarre conspiracy theories instead of the fact that many times the Board of Elections are not properly funded in order to run elections, especially when there's large turnout. Third, we have foreign and domestic dirty tricks. We know that all intelligence services, as well as the Senate Intelligence Committee, confirmed that Russian operatives interrupted the 2016 presidential election with phony Facebook and Twitter accounts, circulating fake news that targeted very specific types of voters to dissuade them from voting or to amplify their support for a specific candidate. Lastly, we have incendiary rhetoric. When politicians and candidates undermine our trust in the election process, people feel despair and often do not vote. So we should worry when a politician rejects in words or action the democratic rules of the game, when a politician denies the legitimacy of his or her opponents, or when we either tolerate or just encourage violence, especially around exercising voting, and when a candidate indicates a willingness to curtail civil liberties of opponents. So just to begin our night, the most powerful tool we have to maintain the legitimacy of our election system is to register to vote and to vote. And we hope that participating in tonight's seminar will get you to not only register yourself and your friends and your family members, but maybe to go out and do a voter registration drive in your own neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hazel, of the League of Women Voters of New York City. And now we will have Olivia Brady, who is the NYC Votes Youth Engagement Coordinator of the New York City Campaign Finance Board. Olivia.
Hi, thank you, Hazel, for that very invigorating introduction, and Catherine as well. So today I'm going to be presenting on just some basic data about voter registration or voter turnout in New York City, and then I'm going to explain how to register yourself and others to vote, as well as walk through the absentee process. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. Our tech person will be temporarily allowing you all to use the chat box. Some of the data I show, I have some interactive elements, so feel free to ask questions using the chat function, or respond to some of the questions I may ask there. Okay. All right. So just for a brief introduction to begin, the New York City Campaign Finance Board is a city agency. We're entirely run by taxpayer dollars, and we were primarily founded to monitor spending in local or municipal elections. So we do a lot of work to ensure that our elections are accessible for all New Yorkers and that the money that is involved in our elections is transparent. We have a wonderful matching funds program and a follow the money tool, which I encourage you all to look into later. Within the Campaign Finance Board, we have NYC Votes, and that's our outreach and engagement arm. So we work directly with the public, whereas the Campaign Finance Board side works directly with candidates. But typically when we're not in a pandemic, we're on the ground doing voter registration. We attend naturalization ceremonies. As the youth coordinator, I'm typically in classrooms in all 5 boroughs. But within that, We Power NYC is our youth branding, and it was actually designed by and with young New Yorkers from all 5 boroughs, which is really exciting, and I'm very proud that we have this initiative up and running. So to start, I just want to present on these election dates. I encourage you all to put these in your phone so you can remind yourself and also nag your friends and family to remember them. But let me just explain what each of them mean. Before I get into that, of course, it's also important to remember that because things are slowed down generally due to COVID-19 and also because of some of the issues we've been having with the USPS, it's important to remember that although these are the legal deadlines, it's really important that you get your forms in, your request in well in advance of these deadlines, just to make sure that the Board of Elections has plenty of time to process your request, your registration, so that you are able to vote on time in November. But first we have the voter registration deadline, October 9th. There's 2 ways to register. If you have a driver's license or state ID, again, which we know that many young New Yorkers do not have, as well as many new citizens or lower income folks, right? But if you do have a driver's license or state ID, you can register online through the DMV portal. And we'll of course follow up with all of these links afterwards. However, if you do not have a driver's license or state ID, you can visit voting.nyc to download a paper form. You'll need to print it, fill it out, sign it, and then mail it directly to the Board of Elections nearest you, or you can take it in person. Again, I recommend doing this well in advance of the October 9th deadline, as soon as you're able to get it done. Next, we have our vote by mail deadlines. So the deadline to request is October 27th. However, again, make sure you request as soon as possible. We've already had about 250,000 people, New Yorkers, request absentee ballots, which is very exciting. But it also means that the Board of Elections is going to have a lot to stay on top of. So the earlier you submit, the more time you give the Board of Elections to get everything processed and send everything your way. You can request your ballot online right now at nycabsentee.com, and I'll have more information about that towards the end of the presentation. So once you request your ballot and you get it in the mail, the deadline to postmark it is November 3rd. Now that does not mean put it in the mail at 5 p.m. November 3rd, right? It won't get there in time. It means put it in the mail, as early as possible. I wouldn't wait longer than November 2nd to put it in the mail. Or this year, the Board of Elections actually has absentee ballot drop boxes at all early voting sites and election day poll sites. And you can take your ballot and drop it off anywhere. It doesn't have to be your particular early voting or election day site, which is great. So if you're working, you can just drop it off at the nearest poll site on your way to or from work. It's very convenient and still a great way to stay COVID safe and beat the long lines on election day. Next up, we have early voting. So New York State has early voting this year, which is very exciting. We've had it for a few years now. In fact, some of the big stadiums have actually volunteered to be early voting sites, which is kind of cool. so you could potentially vote at Madison Square Garden. But early voting will run from October 24th to November 2nd. The important thing to note here is that your early voting site likely differs from your regular election day site. So if you visit voting.nyc, you can find a link to check your registration as well as your poll site. And then finally, if you miss all the other deadlines, you can still always vote on November 3rd, election day. As long as you're in line by the time the polls close, you'll be able to cast your ballot. And again, you can check schedules and locations at voting.nyc. So next, I think when we're having these discussions about voter registration, particularly from the youth lens, like why are young people not voting at such high as the same rate as older groups, right? It's important that we recognize the underlying socioeconomic conditions that affect voter turnout and voter registration. So I'm just going to share some data from our office. I think one of the coolest things about the Campaign Finance Board is the incredible data we have on voter turnout in New York City. We can break it down by age, gender, race, neighborhood, income, and we use this data to determine where our work is needed most and also if our work is effective. And so I'm going to share some of this information with you all right now for background. I have some questions, so again, I encourage you all to interact with the chat box. The lovely Hazel will be monitoring it for me, and she'll let me know if someone chimes in. Okay, so this first graph here shows overall voter turnout by age group and election year. And what you'll notice is that each of these 4 bars represents a different age group. The white bar is 2014. That was a smaller election year, a local state election. 2016 was a big presidential year. I'm sure we all remember the 2016 November election. This navy blue color right here, 2017, that was another citywide year. That was when de Blasio was elected for a second term. And then finally, we have 2018, and this refers to the federal midterm elections for Congress and Senate. I'm sure all of you might have heard about like the squad, you might remember that. But this was actually kind of an unprecedented election turnout year for a midterm. It was the year that the most number of women of color were ever elected to our federal offices, which is very exciting. But again, my first question for you all is just on a first glance, which age group do you see voting the most and which age group do you see voting the least? And then why do you think we're seeing this pattern as well? Oh, Aisha, I will answer your question about absentee ballots when we get to that section of the program. Okay, so I'm not seeing any chats, that's okay. But what you'll notice here is that 18 to 29-year-olds consistently vote the least, unsurprisingly, out of these other age groups, and 60 to 69-year-olds consistently vote the most. I guess like why do you all think that young people vote so much less than these other age groups, and why do you think that this older age group, 60 to 69-year-olds, are voting more than other age groups as well?
Why is this gate now? Okay.
The myth that votes don't count, mostly young people. Right, so there's a bit of, disillusionment or disenfranchisement with the electoral system, right, that we see among young people, and rightfully so. Young adults don't have enough information and less experience. That's also a great point, right? There's not really substantial civic education in our high schools. And so if you're not starting this process of teaching people how to vote before they turn 18, it's unreasonable to expect an 18-year-old to just automatically know and have the desire to register to vote without any background or context. So that's a great point. And again, there are so many other factors that influence this. But sort of the next thing that you'll notice here too is that across the board, we're seeing that local elections Absolutely. That's another great point. You know, young adults are often moving around a lot, right? They might be going between a college campus and home, or like frequently moving apartments. That definitely influences voter turnout there.
So
Yeah,
I just want to add in that we have a comment about that sometimes the candidates are not offering information that's relevant for youth. And that feeds right into the sort of despair and cynicism, yes?
right, absolutely. Hazel, I love that you brought that up. You know, typically the political science says, right, the way that you win an election is by appealing to the population that votes. The population that votes in this case are the 60 to 69-year-olds, right? You know, and we're seeing a lot of up and coming candidates starting to rewrite that script on, you know, voter outreach, right? But, you know, candidates who are only reaching out to this older age demographic and not to younger voters are really perpetuating this cycle and exacerbating these problems. I think the media, Aisha, thank you for that comment. That is a perfect segue into my next point. You know, what you'll notice again is across the board, local elections and state elections have significantly lower turnout for everyone than federal or presidential years do. And I think this point about the media, right, placing more of an emphasis on these federal elections, which of course makes sense if you turn on a national cable news network, they're probably not going to be covering your city council race, right? You know, that's for if you turn on New York 1. But again, like the media does play a huge role in this and in the way that people are able to access information about their local elections as well. And basically what I just want everyone to take away from this is that, you know, young people are not being represented at the same rate as other people are. And we have the potential to really push for change through our electoral system. We just have to figure out how to spark that fire and really motivate our peers to get out and vote, especially in our local elections. And I work for a city agency, so maybe I'm a bit biased, but I really cannot stress the importance of our local elections enough. They touch our day-to-day lives in ways that we often don't even think about. But moving forward, so this is one of my favorite maps that we have. This map tracks voter turnout among 18 to 29-year-old New Yorkers by neighborhood in 2018. And so just a few things to explain here. We've got Staten Island, here's Manhattan, the Bronx, we've got Queens with the Rockaways down here, and then Brooklyn. And areas on the map that are lighter, voter turnout's lower. Areas that are darker, voter turnout for young people is higher. And areas where there's green space, that just means there's a park. So for example, we've got Central Park over here, Prospect Park over there. So there's not voter turnout data for those areas. Another thing to keep in mind is that even in the areas where voter turnout is extremely high for young people, it never gets higher than 62.5%. So you've still got a 40% chunk of the youth population who's not voting. So my first question is, where do you notice people are voting more, and where do you notice people are voting less? Also, if you feel like shouting at your neighborhood and maybe seeing if like the voter turnout data here reflects your personal experience, that would also be awesome. And I'll just give a few minutes for people to type, or a few seconds. Okay, so when I look at this map, I immediately notice that voter turnout's higher in Manhattan, right? Especially the fancier parts of Manhattan, right? We've got parts of downtown Manhattan, Tribeca, Soho, Financial District, Upper East and West Sides. And then also these areas of Brooklyn and Queens that are historically wealthier or have recently been gentrified or experiencing gentrification, right? You know, we've got like Long Island City and Astoria, like areas of downtown Brooklyn, Williamsburg, all of those places, Park Slope. And what you can see here, oh, should I see your comment? Aisha, thank you for pointing that out as well. What you'll notice about this map about the Bronx, every borough has pockets of low voter turnout, but the Bronx consistently, there are no areas of high voter turnout. The entire Bronx has extremely low voter turnout. And so that's one of our target areas for young people right now, particularly because there's some heated congressional districts there, and we want to, of course, our work is nonpartisan, but we want to make sure that everyone has the ability to participate in elections. Does anyone have any guesses as to why voter turnout might be higher for young people in these particular neighborhoods as opposed to other ones? I know one example that gets tossed around a lot. Oh, I see some Q&A. More money, right? I think that is, I think that's like a really strong correlation we're seeing here, right? We know that these areas are predominantly more wealthy than other areas of the city. And we know with wealth also comes increased access to resources, to education, also just like more time to spend researching voting. And it's a complicated process, and it does take some time to decipher, right? If you have more money, you may have more time to research this process and figure out how to get involved in it. But on that note, their parents may be involved as well. I think that's a really great point, right? If you are living in a neighborhood with less wealth, right? Maybe the parents in the neighborhood are more focused on, getting food on the table. How am I going to pay for my Metro card today? And maybe not spending as much time, thinking about elections. But I love that you drew that connection, because our next map here actually kind of solidifies what we were talking about, right? This tracks essentially like neighborhoods that have more wealth, and compares it to the neighborhoods of voter turnout. So what you'll notice here is that this map, areas where it's lighter, and this is voter turnout for all ages, I should clarify. So areas where the map is lighter, it means there is a smaller percentage of people who make $200,000 or more in the neighborhood, which is a lot of money even in New York City. And areas where it's darker, that means more people in the neighborhood, a higher percentage, make $200,000 or more. And then the dot represents voter turnout. So the smaller the dot, the lower voter turnout is. The larger the dot, the higher voter turnout is. And again, you'll also notice that voter turnout, even for all ages, never reaches past 66% in New York City. Again, so we've got a huge chunk, about 30% of voters who are either unwilling or unable to, make their voices heard through elections. But again, any first impressions here when you see this map? Do you notice any patterns? Okay, so when I look at this map here, the first thing I notice is the way that all of the wealth in the city is essentially concentrated in Manhattan. And you'll also see too that areas with more wealth consistently have larger purple dots, which means higher voter turnout. And it's kind of crazy to see it represented on a map like this. What you'll also notice is that there's a strong correlation between, the diversity of a neighborhood. If a neighborhood has a predominantly immigrant population, or a large percentage of naturalized citizens, for example, like Sunset Park in Brooklyn, or like out in Flushing, Queens, right? You'll notice that there tends to be less wealth and lower voter turnout as well. And I kind of just wanted to show you this data because it is important when we're doing this work to acknowledge the fact that there are systemic barriers which prevent people from getting to the polls. You know, in addition to sort of like the active voter suppression we see happening, you know, across the country and even in New York State, there's also these trickle-down effects from other structural racism problems, right, that affect people's access to the polls. So again, I just always want to give some context for the work that we do, and just it's important to acknowledge. But does anyone have any questions about this data or any final comments or anything like that? Okay. Awesome. And again, we have all of this data available on the Campaign Finance Board website, as well as really cool interactive maps. And again, they're very helpful for just sort of seeing, you know, what the socioeconomic landscape of oh, that's a good question. I actually only have the data for the last few years, like from the 2018 election. But again, we do have. I would not be surprised if it wasn't, if it was consistent. But I can't speak certainly. But we do have this data available on the Campaign Finance Board website. If you Google New York City Campaign Finance Board voter analysis report, you'll come up with a couple years worth of this information. And I'm seeing one more chat. Okay, awesome. That is a great question. Some of the more blatant forms of voter suppression. And that question is actually a great segue into the next portion of the workshop, the voter registration form. So I'm just going to talk through how the form works, how to fill it out, how to help other people fill it out, as well as analyze a few of the ways that the form actually disenfranchises otherwise eligible voters. First of all, right, again, it's important to acknowledge that 38.4% of eligible young New Yorkers are not registered to vote. This might not seem like a lot, but in comparison, other age groups are registered between 90 and 100%. So again, we do see young New Yorkers, and as many people mentioned, you know, young people are moving around a lot. You know, voter registration might not be the first thing on their mind. We're not getting registered in high school at the rate that we need to be. There's a lot of factors here. Again, it's just important to see this data and grapple with it. But getting back to the question about voter suppression, right? There are 3 basic requirements to register to vote in New York. You have to be a US citizen. You can pre-register at 16 or 17. You can't vote until you're 18, but you can get that form filled out and ready to go. And then, you know, 18 years old to register and to vote. And you also have to have a mailing address. And this is kind of the key piece of where we're talking about voter suppression here. You know, in New York City, there is a housing crisis. We have an exorbitant population of folks experiencing housing insecurity and even street homelessness. And, you know, people who may otherwise be eligible to register to vote might not have somewhere to receive mail, and that prevents them from filling out the form and getting registered. So I think that's like one very key example of the way that folks are disenfranchised from participating in the system. I think another thing to acknowledge is the fact that, you know, we have a country where our voting system was designed by men, and it was designed for white property owning men. And again, this is essentially the same system we've had since the founding. We've just been making reforms to it to make it more inclusive and more expansive. So this is part of the reason that we still have folks who fall through the cracks, right? And the mailing address example really highlights this issue. Right, but going through to the form, I'm just gonna kind of talk through what this looks like, how to fill it out, all of that good stuff. But first things first, fill the form out in blue or black ink. That's an important one. So first, the citizenship question. Make sure you fill this box out. A lot of people miss it just because it's at the top and it's very tiny, but your form will get rejected if you do not check yes. Another thing is, especially in a city that's as diverse as New York, and particularly with the political climate we've been seeing regarding ICE and immigration, we don't want to make anyone feel uncomfortable or unsafe if we're doing voter registration work in a community. So we shouldn't assume that everyone's a citizen or that everyone's eligible. Use neutral language. Can I help you register to vote? Would you like to? Most people know you have to be a citizen to register. So if someone says no, like, don't necessarily press them. Another thing, just advertising what you're doing, having all of the information laid out at a table so people can opt out of it without having to get into a potentially uncomfortable situation. Just it's important to be cognizant of that. The next thing, just want to emphasize again, 16 and 17-year-olds, you can pre-register. You just fill out the form like everybody else. And so just pay attention to this age section right here. If you're not 18 years or older by November 3rd, check no. And then as long as you're at least 16, you can check yes here. So just make sure you're reading that box carefully. And again, if I'm going too quickly for anyone, please just let me know in the chat box and I can slow down or repeat something. Name and birthday. Use your legal name. Don't use a nickname or a chosen name, right? You have to use your legal name. And write very clearly. There's actually someone at the Board of Elections who looks at your paper form and types your handwritten paper into the computer. So it's really important that your handwriting is legible, otherwise your registration could get messed up. Again, write out your entire birth date. Gender is optional and you can fill out however you best identify if you do wish to fill it out. Phone and email are also optional, but I highly recommend putting them there just in case the Board of Elections needs to talk to you about something. Address. So this is kind of the section where things get a little confusing. If the place where you live is the same place you get your mail, just fill out box number 8. Don't worry about number 9. As I previously mentioned, you do have to have a mailing address to register to vote. So let me elaborate on that a bit here. If you are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity, right, you have an unofficial and permanent address. If you're staying at a shelter, or crashing on a friend's couch or something like that, or even if you're experiencing street homelessness, you can write the name of like the intersection that you are staying at or the name of a park, right? However, if this is the case, you need to make sure that you have somewhere where you can receive mail. And just to clarify, this address where you live, that will affect where your poll site is and who's on your ballot, right? That's like where you are registered to vote. This is just like where you can get your mail. So again, not everyone has access to be able to, get their mail where they live. Particularly for young people, right? We know that students face housing insecurity at an alarming rate. But if you can find a friend or family member who will let you get mail sent to their house. I've worked with schools before where they have allowed their students to have mail sent directly to the school for them in order to register to vote. So again, if you're doing kind of this work in the community, just talk to like the organizations or institutions you might be working with and see how you can make accommodations for this. Again, if you're registering strangers, they're probably not going to feel comfortable disclosing this information to you. So just like with the citizenship question, I just recommend advertising ahead of time, especially if you're in a school and you can do it easily, and just having all of this information directly on the table so folks can read what they need to and opt out of things without directly outing themselves. Let me just check the chat box really quickly. Okay. Awesome. And then your voter information. So if you're registering for the first time, don't worry about this, just leave it blank. You can use the form to update your name, address, change your political party. And if you're doing this or you're registering from a new state, definitely fill this out. Because that way the Board of Elections can, if you're registering from a new state, cancel your old registration. And also just make sure that you're the same person so you don't get registered twice. But yeah, this one's pretty straightforward. Identification. So in order to register to vote, you either need to have a driver's license or state ID number, so your DMV number, or you need to know the last 4 digits of your social security number. And this is so that the Board of Elections can verify that you are who you say you are. However, if you don't know this or you don't have it, don't worry, you can still register. Just check this last box. I do not have a New York State driver's license or a social security number. Just check it. The only thing is, when you go to vote for the first time, you will need to bring documentation with you that verifies your name and address as it matches what you registered with. I know a lot of folks have an NYC ID. It's a much more affordable and accessible alternative to the driver's license or state ID. You can use that. Any kind of official documentation, school transcript, school ID, I recommend bringing like more than one piece with you, just to be on the safe side. The other thing I want to add here too is that New York State is a no ID voter state. So unless it is your first time voting and you checked this last box when you registered to vote, you should not be asked for your ID at the poll site. The thing I would stress though, if you don't feel comfortable, if an election inspector unfairly asks for your ID and you don't feel comfortable sort of arguing with them, and you just want to be able to cast your vote, you can always file a complaint afterwards. Do whatever you feel safe and comfortable doing in the moment. I just always like to make sure that people know that they have multiple options when it comes to handling a situation like this. Okay, I see the chat box. Will you be, Mariama, will you be 18 on November 3rd? Okay, so you will just register normally because you'll be 18 on November 3rd. You'll be able to vote. That's very exciting. Or no, 18 on November 2nd. So you'll be able to vote officially in the November 3rd election. And you can only register online if you have a driver's license or state ID. But I'm going to put the link voting.nyc. So if you visit voting.nyc, I just dropped it in the chat. You can find a downloadable PDF form in multiple languages. You can fill it out and mail it to the Board of Elections. So yeah. Any questions about this? I know this is like quite a bit of information, so if I need to clarify anything, feel free to ask. All right. Oh, I see a question. Oh, oops, that's because I hit the wrong button when I sent it. If you type voting.nyc to your browser, you'll be able to get there. Okay. Political party. So here comes my spiel about political parties. So choosing a party is optional. You can only choose one, so you can't register as a Democrat and a Republican. You also, the issue here is in New York State that you must be registered with a political party in order to vote in a primary election. So just to clarify for folks who may not know the difference between a primary and a general, the primary is where you choose from your respective party that you want to run against everyone else in November. So for example, I'm sure we were all following the drama with the millions of people the Democrats who wanted to run for president, right? We went through all the primaries, and then the Democrats ended up with Joe Biden, and so Joe Biden will run against Donald Trump in November. So that's just kind of like how political parties work. And we have these primary elections at all levels of government, especially in New York City. And I will say, in a city that swings heavily Democratic, oftentimes the outcome of the election can be decided in the primary, because in some neighborhoods, it would be so crazy that there are so many registered Democrats that it would just be crazy that a Republican, for example, would win over a Democrat. So in that case, the election can get decided in the primary. I will say, that I am registered with a political party. I cannot say which one because I'm a city employee. And I will say that I am only registered with a party so that I have more voting options. And so that's essentially what registering with a party gives you right now. You can vote for whoever you want in the general election. You're not signing your life away to the party. You don't have to agree with everything the party does, right? It just gives you more voting options. And again, this is very problematic, right? And you shouldn't have to register with a party if you don't believe in everything that they do. But it is just important to know the facts about this. And then just to clarify, the Independence Party is not the same as no party. A lot of folks get confused about this, so I always just like to add it in as a caveat. And if you, on this box, if you do not check a political party, you'll automatically be registered with no party. And again, you can also change your political party. You just have to be cognizant of like the different deadlines around this. So you could register with a party now, and if you change your mind later, you're not stuck with it forever. Okay. So then last but not least, the signature piece. Something I do want to emphasize as well is that you are able to help other people fill out this form with their consent. Oftentimes senior citizens, or like we do a lot of work at naturalization ceremonies with new citizens, if there's a language barrier, they'll just hand me their ID, and with their consent, I'm able to just fill out the form for them. This is also helpful if you're working with folks with like low vision or another disability. And so the only thing is that they just have to sign it themselves. And the signature can just be an X. It does not have to be a full signature, just they have to do it themselves. And then make sure to include the date. You can fill out the date for them. It's just the signature piece. And again, a lot of people forget this because it's at the bottom. So just make sure you're double checking forms and making sure that it gets filled out. Again, right now, we have an online absentee request portal, so I wouldn't stress about this. But I highly recommend becoming an election day worker. We have a poll worker shortage in New York State, actually across the country right now. It's a great opportunity to get more involved in the political process, especially in like nonpartisan work. And also you can make so much money if you're 18. It's just a really great opportunity to make money, and also to get more involved in your community. How do I apply? Great question. So if you visit the Board of Elections website, you can find an application, and there's two types of positions available, an elections inspector and an interpreter. And so you can read more about them there. And I'm sure we'll send up a follow-up email after this, and we'll include links to register as well, or to apply to be an election day worker. New York State has an organ shortage, so I just like to remind people that there is an organ donation form on the back of the voter registration form. Again, it's completely optional, totally up to you if this is something you want to do. If you're not interested, just leave it blank, but it is there. And then last, just want to hit on a couple of voting considerations. So for formerly incarcerated individuals in New York State, we've had several voting reforms made. If you are on probation, you can vote. If you're on parole, but you've been formally pardoned by the governor, you can also vote. This second option is very rare, so it will not apply to a lot of people, if any, I believe. But it is just important to note that there's a common perception that if you have been incarcerated or involved in any sort of legal trouble, you lose your voting rights. This is not always entirely true. I highly recommend, checking with your lawyer, checking with the Board of Elections. You will need to reactivate your voter registration, but I like to make this very clear. Additionally, if you are presently incarcerated on less than a felony charge, or you are awaiting trial or bail, you can request an absentee ballot be sent to you. This is a very important right that a lot of people are not able to take advantage of simply because of a lack of knowledge. So I just, again, want to make sure everybody has proper information regarding this topic.
Olivia, can I just interject, because I work with formerly incarcerated. Governor Cuomo issued a conditional pardon that affects about 80% of men and women who are serving on parole, and allowed them to register to vote. So there is a special portal that people can check with their probation officers to see whether or not they have been given that conditional pardon, and then they're able to register to vote.
Hazel, thank you so much for adding that. I actually did not know that, so thank you. That's very helpful. Um, but moving forward again, the voting record is public. It's difficult to get access to. You actually have to go to the Board of Elections and pay 25 cents a page for it or whatever it is. But if you are a survivor of domestic violence and you want to just have another added level of safety, you can seal your record. Safe Horizon is a great resource for this. They have a lot of pro bono legal work, and they also just do a lot of generally good work, and they're a document blind institution, so they won't, look at your immigration status. But I like to plug their work because they do amazing work. And then finally, I just, again, want to reiterate the point about having an impermanent address. You can still register. You just need to find a place where you can receive mail. Any questions about this? Okay, perfect. And then last, I'm just going to talk about vote by mail in New York State. So I will say voting by mail is probably the safest way you can vote right now in terms of, being socially distant and making sure that we're staying safe and healthy. Governor Cuomo issued an executive order that allows any eligible voter to cast an absentee ballot. Before you had to have a qualifying reason, but anyone due to the pandemic is able to request now. And just remember, it's a two-step process. You have to request and you have to submit. And I'll talk about that in a minute. I know I had a question about it earlier. So the first thing you have to do is you have to submit an absentee ballot application to receive your ballot. You can do this at www.nycabsentee.com. It takes like 5 minutes. It's super easy. You can also fill it out for someone, again, if you're helping a senior citizen or someone with a language barrier. With their consent, you can request a ballot for them. So that's just something important to know. And then when you're filling it out, you're going to check temporary illness. The meaning of this has been expanded to account for all COVID-19 pandemic reasons, right? So just make sure you check that temporary illness box. And then if you're away from your home for some reason, you can have it sent to wherever you are. And the deadline to request is October 27th. But honestly, if you're registered to vote and you'd like to request an absentee ballot, I'm going to put the link in the chat for you right now. You should request it right away. It is a super easy process. So then the next step, once you send in your application, you'll need to complete and submit your ballot. So New York State actually just implemented an absentee ballot tracking system. So once you submit your application, you'll be able to see what the status of it is, if your ballot's been sent, and if it's been received. And if it does get rejected, you'll be able to read the reason as to why it was rejected. The BOE has stated they'll be sending out absentee ballots on or after September 18th. So as soon as you request your form, as soon as it's September 18th, start checking your mailbox every day. Once you get your ballot, follow the instructions very carefully. I cannot emphasize that enough. Follow them like to a T. Use blue or black ink. And kind of the great thing about voting absentee is that you can take your time, right? You can go home, you can Google all the candidates, really like maybe if you're comfortable, talk about it with your friends or maybe other members of your household, right? To see who, you really want to vote for. You're not rushed in the poll box or the voting booth. And then once you're finished with it, if you're going to mail it, you'll need to provide postage. And you should put it in the mailbox immediately. I recommend taking it directly to the post office, actually. And then the other option, of course, is that no postage required for this. You can drop it off at any early voting or election day site. And you can look up the Board of Elections website and see wherever is closest to you to drop it off. And they have these very cute little boxes that are very secure that you can drop it off in. And then, of course, be sure to sign the back of the envelope as instructed. A lot of people forgot to do this last time and their ballots were rejected. I think they redesigned the ballots to make it more clear that you need to sign, but don't forget it. And then again, the deadline, November 3rd, but really do it way before then, as early as possible. And then here's just a couple of resources that our office offers. Voting.nyc is our landing page. You can check your registration, read the voter guide, find your poll site. I'm sure we'll be adding the absentee ballot tracking link soon. And it's available in several languages. So it's just a really great like one-stop resource for all of this. Again, you can also all take the pledge to vote. I'm gonna put this link in the chat for you all to do as well. By doing this, you will, receive election alerts and reminders either on your phone or by email. It's a great tool to hold yourself accountable. You can't say, oh, I forgot, if you are getting a text message reminder about it. And again, we also don't hassle you. We don't send you that many emails just when there's an important election update. And then finally, workshops. I offer youth workshops to young people in all 5 boroughs, ages 14 to 24. So if you'd like me to come to your school or an after-school program or something like that, feel free to send me an email, connect me with your teachers, program directors. I would be happy to come in and work with y'all. And then I know you all are hosting, like next week, Hazel mentioned that the League of Women Voters is hosting more information about organizing a drive, so I won't go into too much detail here. But I just had some examples of potentially like COVID-safe voter mobilization events you can do right now. So mailing your friends voter registration forms, you can support the post office and get people registered, right? Handing out forms in your building. I have some friends who have done this. Organizing a social media blitz. Again, follow us on Instagram at NYC Votes. We post a lot of important content that you can share with your friends. Working with your teachers or professors, working with your place of worship or community center, doing virtual text and phone banks. Those are all some options. And then just a couple do's and don'ts here. I won't walk through all of them. The biggest thing is just, I would say, when you're talking to people and trying to encourage them to vote, use that issues-based approach, right? So think about the issues that affect you and the community you're working with most and tie it back directly to the concrete powers and responsibilities of the people who are in office or on the ballot. I found, especially with young voters, that this is really one of the most effective ways to get people, to insert themselves in the political process. And of course, be safe. Wear your mask and gloves if you're doing in-person work. Social distancing, we all know this. And then last, I'm just putting these deadlines on the screen again. Put them in your calendar, make a mental note. But yeah, that is everything I wanted to cover. Again, I will drop my email in the chat box here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And yes, thank you so much, Catherine and Hazel, for putting this together and for having me today.
Thank you so much, Olivia. So appreciate your presentation, and that was really marvelous. I also mentioned that in the chat, there is the agenda that does have resources also for you. So if you want to see the agenda and the names of all the speakers and some of the resources that they've provided, that is available for you. So now we're going to move on to Valerie Vasquez, who's Director of Communications and Public Affairs for the New York City Board of Elections. And she's going to be speaking to us about protecting democracy by becoming a poll worker. Thank you so much for being here, Valerie.
Thank you. I wanted to thank Catherine for organizing and inviting us and for always being a partner. I know you're so very informed on all things election related. We can't thank you enough for your partnership. I do have to start from the very beginning and just, there was a comment regarding Brooklyn not ordering enough ballots, and I just have to clarify, there was never an issue with Brooklyn not ordering enough ballots. As a matter of fact, we had a third-party vendor that completed, because we expected so many applications to come in, we didn't print any of those in-house. All absentee ballots are from 2 vendors that are actually our ballot print vendors that send out all of the actual ballots themselves, because we anticipated such an increase in requests. So just to put it into context, we received 800,000 applications for the June primary, for the June presidential primary, as compared to 65,000 4 years ago. So we are working with our partners to make sure that we improve the process. I know Olivia touched on most of the things Board of Elections related, but one of the things that we are very proud of is the portal where individuals can visit the board website and fill in the application. We and Erie County are the only 2 counties within the state of New York that actually have a portal. As far as the tracker, it's not a state tracker, it's a New York City tracker, and it's exclusive to us. We've been working on it for quite some time. So we are hoping, we've heard basically the sentiment from voters, and that one of the key questions, especially in social media, was, where's my ballot? So we're hoping that this level of transparency and access for the voters will really help streamline the process and increase the confidence. In terms of applications so far, we've received over 350,000 applications. Our portal went live on August 21st. Our staff is working around the clock as the applications come in. They're processed by a bipartisan team of board staff to make sure that everything is in order and that the voter is eligible to receive that particular ballot. We expect the ballots to go out on the 18th of September. As will a mailer. We will be sending out a mailer to all registered voters, both inactive and active, the end of September. Around the 21st actually is when we hope to start mailing, where we will give the voter not only the dates of the election, but obviously their assigned early voting location and their assigned election day poll site. As Olivia stated, you have to be assigned to a particular early voting site. We have seen an increase in sites that are willing to be partners, so that's encouraging. Sites like MSG and Barclay, 92nd Street Y, and others. So we thank them for their partnership. If you could think of any organizations or potential spaces, we are always looking for additional space. So you could always send that to me, and we will have a survey team reach out to see if we could find more sites to make it convenient for New York City voters. In terms of applications, poll worker applications rather, poll workers really are the unsung heroes of the election day process. And without
We lost you there.
Yeah, without them, we would not be able to conduct our elections. We launched an aggressive digital social media campaign and buy on September 1st, which was really tied to National Poll Worker Day. And I'm happy to report since September 1st, we have received a total of 15,000 applications. So that is a huge amount. Again, the opportunity is that if a person were to work 10 days, they could make up to $2,800. So of course, there's that financial incentive. The idea is that you can get paid to serve your community. We are always looking for additional interpreters in the covered languages that the board covers: Spanish, Chinese, Korean, and Bengali. We've done outreach and work with some community-based organizations within those areas to help us increase the pool of interpreters as well. We also have a 17-year-old poll worker program, which is really a great program that I would love to see get even more, expand to more schools, but we've worked with the Department of Education and some private schools where 17-year-old students actually serve as poll workers. We work with the schools. They have their own application where their dean or their assistant principal has to sign off, their parent as well, confirm that they're a student in good standing, and then we train them, have them work on election day. They're paid the same amount as every other poll worker. They bring a great energy to the poll sites, and every poll site that I've visited that has had a student poll worker has really said they are so valuable to the site, and the energy they bring is fantastic. We encourage anyone who wants to become a poll worker to visit our website, nyc.electiondayworker.com. And from there, once you sign in, you'll be assigned to a training. They will send you your information in terms of your poll worker assignment once you pass the class and the exam, and then are assigned to a poll site. Everything will be via that particular portal. So we're hoping that more New Yorkers avail themselves of that, become poll workers. Barclays, one of the most recent poll sites that we announced was the Barclays Center, and they committed to having their staff become poll workers because they're closed that day. So the president sent out a message to all their staff members to use the time. They would be paid for the day, and then they would be paid as a poll worker. So we're hoping other corporations will do similar and see the value of becoming a poll worker and sharing that social responsibility. So if you have any questions, I'll be here, and Catherine knows how to reach me. We hope that you all become poll workers, and if you know of anyone that would like to be a poll worker, to please send them to our website so we can sign them up.
Thank you so much, Valerie. And I just wanted to mention one thing while you're still on the voter card. Certainly, we don't require any voter ID in New York. However, the Board of Elections is providing a wonderful voter card that is going to come in that mailer. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that.
So we are actually going to do more of a push Tuesday, but since you're always watching our commissioners meeting, you have a sneak peek into that. But yes, what we had always planned to have this voter card, and actually the Queens voters in April is when we piloted it, because Queens had a borough-wide special election for a borough president. So we mailed out this card, and we called it a fast pass tag. And the idea is, because we're using electronic poll books, it would assist the voter, assist the poll worker, the line would move faster. And if they bring this card, similar to a card that you'd receive at, your local Stop and Shop, or even a gym membership, where they just scan your ID, where they scan your card, it would be the same thing. They scan your card, and the poll worker would then see your name and address. They'd be able to get your ballot, and you'd mark it and just go on from there. Now, in this era of what we're dealing now with social distancing, the idea was this is another way to have contactless check-in. So if a voter were to bring their card with them, they then could eliminate the need to less interaction with the voter and the poll worker. You don't have to share your name and your address. Instead, you just scan your card, and everything will populate. So the idea is to not only move the line faster, but to now have this contactless check-in. So we're very excited about that. The staff has been working on it for a while, and we really hope that New Yorkers take to it. We've had the card before. It's just this idea that we're branding it as a tag, and there's essentially now a key fob that allows for a voter to put it on their keychain and save it for elections to come.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you so much for being with us tonight in such a busy time for your agency.
Yes,
you're working day and night there. Thank you so much for being with us. So we'll be moving on now to our speakers from the Andrew Goodman Foundation. And we have Caroline Smith, who's the program manager, and we have afterwards Yael Bromberg, who is the chief counsel for voting rights, and also a principal in Bromberg Law, LLC. So Caroline, take it away. Thank you so much for being here, both of you.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And while we still have Valerie, I just want to point out that there's a question in the Q&A to repeat the website. So I don't know if you can.
Oh, sure. It is nyc.electiondayworker.com.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Didn't want to miss that. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. Again, my name's Caroline. I'm a program manager with the Andrew Goodman Foundation. We're a nonpartisan organization that works to ensure voting accessibility, promote leadership development, and advance social justice campaigns on campuses across the country. So basically, we provide many grants and other resources to select higher education institutions and additional financial support to student leaders to empower them to promote civic engagement on their campuses. So AGF has a very powerful history that I just want to talk about briefly. In May of 1964, when the Civil Rights Act was under attack in Congress, Andrew Goodman, who was then a college student, signed up for Freedom Summer, which was a project run by civil rights giants like John Lewis, aimed at registering Black folks in Mississippi to vote. And on Andy's first day in Mississippi, he and two other civil rights workers, James Chaney and Michael Schwerner, were murdered by the KKK. So the Andrew Goodman Foundation was established in honor of Andy, James, and Michael to continue the fight for voting rights that they died for, and so many others had died for before them, and many have since. So we've seen students and young folks lead every successful movement in our history, whether it be anti-war, anti-gun violence, equitable higher education, racial justice, the list goes on. So it only makes sense to devote resources to further train and empower the faces of our future. So I work directly with students on college campuses, and though I myself am a pretty recent voter, or recent student and a young voter, I'm right on the edge of the millennial and Gen Z designations. But I've learned so much by organizing alongside our students. I can see without a doubt that the world in which I became a voter in 2014, as recent as it may sound, is not the same one that we're living in now. Our youth and our newest voters are receiving absentee ballots in the mail and getting a notification that an entire coast of our country is on fire, and reading an article about a president who threatens to cut funds from their city all on the same day. They're taking to the streets to protest police brutality and environmental racism in a magnitude that, quite frankly, we've never seen before. And so in the midst of all of this, we hear a lot of takes on the youth vote, I think, and I experienced that as a young voter. So young folks are the biggest voting bloc, as people have said numerous times tonight, putting them, and I guess us if I include myself, in an incredibly powerful position to sway a life-changing election. And yet, as people have said, historically, we aren't the ones with the highest voting rates. It really makes my skin crawl, though, as a young voter, when I hear blanket statements like young people don't want to vote, and I think we can all agree that's probably true for all of us. I've experienced a tremendous amount of momentum among young voters who, are tired of inaction and the status quo of the electoral world that we grew up in. And so I want to reiterate what some people have said and just make it very clear that I think any lag in youth voting rates should be attributed to voter suppression and not apathy. Young folks are a lot of things. We are not apathetic in any way. But what I will say is, amidst the incredible excitement that I've experienced working with our AGF students and their peers, I've had some really powerful conversations with students who are struggling to balance the importance of voting and the electoral process with their lived experiences having not felt represented by electoral politics in their lifetimes. And as Olivia discussed really well, our political system was not made to represent everyone, plain and simple. And while we've made a lot of strides to make our democracy more representative and accessible, distrust of the system is completely valid and should definitely not be equated with apathy. And I see that happen a lot. So I've had an ongoing conversation with one student in particular who identifies as a young Black woman and a prominent community organizer in the Black Lives Matter movement. And my work with her has just been really illuminating, so I want to share it with you all. The first day that I met her, she asked me how to respond to a student who says, "I don't think I'll vote because I've never seen it work before." And she went on to say that she had trouble answering this response because, to an extent, she had felt it too. She had been a consistent voter since she turned 18, but she's struggled to see the benefits, as the same day that we met, she had been tear gassed protesting for her life. And so this stark contrast between her longtime participation in our political process and her lived experience as a Black woman has been an ongoing struggle as she tries to organize her peers to vote. So in my experience, especially as a white woman, it's so incredibly important to acknowledge this, again, not as apathy, but as a valid experience of a flawed yet deeply important political system, and then to, take that as an opportunity for conversation. And so as I struggled to come up with an answer or a solution for her in that moment, she did it for me. And I've taken her words with me every day since. She said, I know that voting won't be the only source of my liberation, but it will drastically change the platform in which I organize. And I've just found this to be an incredibly powerful approach and mindset. And what I've learned in my work and my experience as a young voter myself is that for a lot of young folks, the draw of elections is no longer choosing a president. It's, you know, setting a stage that we can actually work with. It's choosing the person who will appoint Supreme Court judges who will rule on cases that we take from the streets to the highest courts. And it's choosing local representatives who won't call in the National Guard when we dare to protest. And so I've found this to be a really important talking point, particularly recently in our global context, when engaging with the inevitable and, again, valid why should I vote question for anyone, but especially for young folks. So anyway, that's a lot of anecdotal stuff for me as a young voter and as someone who spends definitely like 75% of my life working and talking with students. But I want to pass it on to my colleague, Yael Bromberg, who, as Catherine mentioned, is AGF's Chief Counsel for Voting Rights. And she does incredible work supporting our organizing efforts, you know, taking what we report from our students and then bringing in the legal side and making voting more just and accessible for our students. So Yael, take it away.
Hi, folks. Thanks, Caroline. Wow, that question of just debunking this idea of apathy is so critical. This is a myth. Young people have always shaped the story of America. Alexander Hamilton, John Lewis, Martin Luther King, Alice Paul, Frederick Douglass, they were all in their 20s. Almost all of them that I just listed, except for John Lewis, were in their very early 20s when they were doing phenomenal things around shaping discourse around their constitutional rights. Frederick Douglass, I believe he was 21 years old when he first took the stage at the Anti-Slavery Massachusetts Society. Alice Paul, the same, when she was starting the movement that would usher in the 19th Amendment, which we're celebrating the centennial 100-year anniversary for. So these are our founders. Our founders were supported by young people. And we saw that throughout the 60s when young people were leading the various movements, just like they are today. And in 1971, those young leaders finally realized that they themselves did not have access to the franchise. And they worked to ratify and constitutionalize their own right to vote. And that is the story of the 26th Amendment, which we're approaching the 50th anniversary of next July. Most people don't know what the 26th Amendment is. I'm a constitutional scholar, I'm a constitutional litigator. When I talk about this work, even among constitutional scholars and litigators, they don't know what the 26th Amendment is. And so this is an opportunity for us to popularize this idea, right? We've abandoned this right, this idea that 50 years ago, young people constitutionalized their own right to vote. The right to vote shall not be denied or abridged for those over the age of 18 on account of age. This was a youth-led effort. And the reason that people don't know about it, I'm assuming that many of the callers here don't know about it. I mean, literally when I talk to constitutional scholars, they don't know about it. So I don't expect anyone else to know about it. But it's because we've abandoned this right and we've stopped to discuss it. And it's not litigated. There's a new jurisprudence that we're involved in at the Andrew Goodman Foundation to both popularize this right and to litigate and develop a jurisprudence around it. There's very fascinating cases that are coming up right now. Justice Sotomayor just noted in one kind of procedural order that came down by the United States Supreme Court that this is an evolving jurisprudence that they don't really have clear direction on. My scholarship seeks to kind of address that. But this is where we are right now, where people don't even know about this right. It's the most recent voting rights amendment to be ratified in our history. It's the quickest Amendment to be ratified in US history. It took less than 100 days for it to go through the requisite 38 states to be ratified. Why? Because it was supported across partisan lines, largely unanimously, and the nation hit a tipping point in recognizing the critical value that young people play in protecting our democracy. It was beyond just the concept of this right to vote. It's that young people specifically preserve our democracy. And do you know who ceremoniously signed that into law? Was Republican President Richard Nixon. And who else spoke about this idea was Republican President Dwight Eisenhower, the World War II commander, during his 1954 State of the Union. So I love talking about youth voting rights and protecting it in the courts, but talking about it with young people and in general is because young people are critical to our democracy. You're actually acting and going to vote is critical. We see election margins that are decided by a handful. When I say a handful, I mean less than 5, even 1 vote. And you can be that voter. You could have moved another voter to do so. We're seeing, because this 26th Amendment is not so popularized, and we're kind of in this popularization campaign, we're seeing methods at the Andrew Goodman Foundation when we look at these trends nationally in which young people are not being engaged in the same way. We have a lawsuit that we just brought in Dutchess County in New York to bring a polling place on campus for the BARD students. 70% of the voters at the assigned off-campus polling place come from the BARD community, and yet they need to travel to this like delinquent, small, non-ADA compliant polling location when their multi-purpose room or their gym can quite robustly provide an adequate and particularly safe venue in light of COVID. I just saw a quote from one of the higher ed leaders acknowledging that colleges serve as unique spaces to host polling sites. This was true even before COVID. COVID is making clear how access to democracy is even further threatened. We already know these things. Other areas in which we're seeing particular obstacles for young people, strict voter identification laws. Some states don't allow a student ID to vote. Some states that do allow a student ID to vote only allow it under very strict circumstances. So we litigated around that in Wisconsin, strictest student voter identification bill in the country. Florida had an outright ban on the allowance of placing polling sites on campus. We litigated that and won on 26th Amendment grounds. We're seeing this across the board. VBMs, vote by mails, when you crunch the numbers and look at the rejection rates, outsized rejection by young voters compared to any other demographic, right? Because they're first-time voters, they're increase in transient, all the reasons that we heard earlier, this applies to VBM. So we just have to be particularly diligent and vigorous about engaging young people, empowering them, debunking this myth that they're just apathetic. They're not. They are today's leaders, and they always have been our leaders, including around constitutional rights, nevertheless, social justice movements more generally. And we need to be very conscious of the fact that their vote by mail ballots and their provisional ballots statistically are rejected at outside rates. And that is not to be disempowering. That is to say, even more reason for us to equip ourselves and to see these restrictions within a 26th Amendment perspective, but also to be particularly diligent in the way that we educate voters and we educate ourselves and we read the voter registration materials so that we make sure that we can abide by that. So we have 54 days until the election. This is go time. It's not about partisanship. This is about democracy. And we all really have to be engaged. And that includes filling out the census, which I know we'll also talk about, and just working multiculturally, multi-generationally to pull together. And it's not just about this election, it's about us working in general around democracy work. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Yael. So appreciate your being here tonight and representing your organization that has done so much for voting rights throughout the years. And We're so happy to have you here tonight. Thank you. So now I'd like to welcome back Shanice, who is going to speak to us about putting law to work and being a lawyer.
Thanks so much, Catherine. And actually, this is a great transition because you just heard a bunch of really interesting, cool types of work that Ms. Bromberg does, at her institution. And basically, how do we combine making an impact, making a difference in our communities and a law degree? So let me first take a step back and tell you a little bit more about what the committee at the Bar Association that I'm chairing does. So first of all, the committee is called the New York City Bar Association Committee on Diversity Pipeline Initiatives. And it focuses on creating a pipeline from starting from high school all the way through college and then law school, then into the legal profession for students of color, students from underrepresented communities, giving them the resources, the guidance, the support, the network in order to achieve their goals and get that law degree at the end of all those years of working really hard through school and dedicating their passion to make a difference in our communities. So for example, we have the Thurgood Marshall Summer Law Internship Program. We actually just wrapped it up recently that pairs high school students with legal employers. The next big event that we have coming up actually is going to be in January of 2021, so a few months from now, but it's for the LSAT Law School Conference where college students can virtually meet law school representatives, current and former law school students, as well as test prep companies, for example, and basically get to know a little bit more about the law school application process, what it takes to actually go to law school, and also meet and talk about all your different options, which law schools are out there, what might suit you. So once again, these are some of the initiatives that our committee does throughout the year. Hazel Weisser is actually on the committee with me. And if you have any further questions, I'll drop my email in the chat box. Feel free to reach out to me about our programs. But once again, if an event like this, moved you in any way, you have an interest in being a poll worker and you're thinking to yourself, what can I do in the future? What can I do with a career of mine? Law school might be an option for you. And we here at the City Bar, we have the resources to help you get on that path and achieve your goals. So with that, like I said, I'll drop my email in the chat box and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shanice. So one moment. Sorry, a little delay. Okay, I just wanted to speak very briefly about disinformation, because we're receiving a lot of information about voting. Now, one thing this is going to be very short and practical. This year, we have a lot of choices about how we can vote. Of course, we can vote in person on election day. We can vote early, 9 whole days of early voting from Saturday, October 24th to Sunday, November 1st. And then in addition, you can vote by mail. So the idea is you get to think about how you're going to vote and what is best for you. Now, a lot of people are opting for absentee ballots. I do not opt for absentee ballots for a number of reasons, but it's of course your choice. All of us are going out now for one reason or another. So I think going out to the poll site is really a safe option. The poll workers will all be wearing masks. You'll get a nice little pen, a little personal pen, which you can use on the electronic poll book, and also you can use to mark your ballot. Voting early is really a wonderful choice because usually the poll sites are less crowded. You have many hours to choose from, and you will receive a mailing, as Valerie talked about earlier, from the Board of Elections that is going to talk to you about your early voting poll site and hours. So you can really think about what your choices are and when you're going to go vote. Now, some people do like to vote by absentee, but when you vote by absentee, your ballot has to jump through so many hoops before it gets counted. You've got to request the ballot. You've got to do it timely. You've got to get the application. Now you can apply online, which is a good thing, but you've got to receive that ballot in a timely way. Then when you receive it, you've got to fill it out properly. As Olivia mentioned and Valerie, you've got to make sure there are no stray marks on your ballot. You've got to make sure that you put it in that inner envelope, that you sign and date the inner envelope. You can't use any kind of tape or anything or staples to seal up the envelope, because of course, if the Board of Elections saw that, then they would think that your ballot was tampered with. When your ballot is received, they got to make sure that you're a registered voter that is allowed to vote in the election. And then the ballot is examined very carefully for any of these little errors, for example, if you forgot to sign it or so on. So there's a lot of extra hoops that an absentee ballot has to get through in order to be counted, whereas when you vote in person, you mark your ballot and you put it in through the scanner and it's counted right away. So I just wanted to mention that, and I want to just one other thing very briefly is there's going to be a lot of, now why does it take a long time to count absentee ballots? It's not because of fraud, and it's not because of people doing the wrong thing. It's actually because the election workers are following the law, and they are required by law to follow this very concrete step-by-step process. And that is in a public process. In New York City, the candidates can observe this counting process. The political parties and also the press can observe this counting process. So the counting process of the absentee ballots is a transparent, legal process. Now, if we want to eliminate some of those steps and make it quicker to count absentee ballots, we can do that. But we'll have to work to change the law. So when election night comes and when there's no immediate result and you say, who's the president? Who won Congress? We may not know for a while. In 2016, the results in New York City were not certified until December 5th. So it's going to take a little while. But I just want you to know that when it's taking a while, and maybe some of your friends might be saying, oh, there's chaos, there's cheating. And some people in the news are going to be saying that. And some people in the news are going to be saying, I won, it's election night, I won. You can say, no, we have to carefully and legally count the absentee ballots. And that's the process that is gonna go on. So that's what I have to say. And now I'm very pleased to pass the torch on to Artie Coley or to Julie Menon. We have the Director and Deputy Director of NYC Census 2020. And Artie, take it away. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. It means a lot to us that you're here.
Hi, it's Julie. I'm here. So I'm going to start. And Catherine, thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you for everyone who is participating. I'm just going to apologize in advance because it was just a very important court ruling that came out in the Southern District in terms of President Trump's attempts illegally to not count undocumented in terms of the census. And so I'll have to apologize because I may get pulled into a briefing tonight. So I really apologize, but we're trying to do a couple different things and we're working on this ruling. But if I have to turn it over to Artie, I will, but I will be happy to start off. And I think we're going to start with a video from...
Now more than ever, it's super important that every New Yorker counts. The COVID-19 pandemic is affecting us all, but it's affecting our Black and brown communities the most. And the only way to get the programs and the funding that we deserve is to fill out the census. It only comes once every 10 years. It's only 10 simple questions. And by law, your information cannot be shared. There are no citizenship questions on the census. So go to my2020census.gov and get counted.
Cardi B here to talk to you about your civic duties in 2020. Your community's future is in your hands, not just for the next 4 years, but for the next decade. The 2020 census decides how much power, money, and respect our city gets. In past censuses, Black and brown communities have been undercounted and unseen. The census is for everyone regardless of immigration status. Mi gente presente. Go to my2020census.gov now and fill out 10 simple questions to get counted.
So you can see those are some of our ads that we have been running and are still running. And in terms of how the city is doing, we actually just got the new data in today. So these are the numbers you're seeing are from the 9th, but the data as a 10th is actually 59.1%. We are extremely close to where the city was in 2010, and we still have 3 weeks to go. So our numbers are actually increasing significantly. And in fact, New York City's numbers have moved more than any other city since May 4th. In terms of some top neighborhoods, you can certainly see, I won't read them all out, but we have some, real high points, certainly Co-op City in the Bronx at 74.5%. And then we have areas like Midtown Manhattan at 43% and other areas, North Corona, that we still have a lot of work that we need to do. And so obviously, I won't talk about this because I know everyone on this call is familiar with why this matters, but certainly the census is about money, it's about power, it's about respect, it's about all the funding, the congressional seats. It's so important that we get every single New Yorker counted. And clearly there is no citizenship question. I say clearly we were part of the coalition that won the case at the Supreme Court. So there is no citizenship question. With that said, there have been repeated attempts since then by the Trump administration to continue to interfere with the census. So we continue to fight those back. In terms of the end date, so it was supposed to be October 31st. It is now September 30th. So we literally have 3 weeks left. There is a case in California that is winding its way through the courts right now. A TRO was recently issued to stop the US Census Bureau from suspending their field operations. So we obviously are closely monitoring this case and how it will turn out and whether or not it will impact the final deadline. But we have to assume the worst case that the deadline stands at September 30th. In terms of what we're doing, so we have a multi-pronged strategy, working with community groups, a media campaign, our field campaign, and our partnerships. So the next slide gives just a quick snapshot of some activities this week. This week, our team made 171,000 calls. In total, you can see there are 3.5 million calls that we've made. We've sent out over 7 million texts. These are not robo-texts. These are actually individual conversations. And just over 9,000 completes just last week. So that's from our team. So we've been working really, really hard on that. In terms of the next slide, you can see some of our campaigns, the different media campaigns that we've launched. We have numerous campaigns in many different languages that we have. And then in terms of some innovative ways we're trying to encourage New Yorkers to participate, we have a lot of different contests. We have a contest we've been running for a while with Seamless, where every week one winner wins $1,000 of free food delivery. All people have to do is complete the census and email us a confirmation. We have free memberships to the Museum of Modern Art. We've got membership and credits to City Bike, to Lyft. So we're really trying to motivate New Yorkers who have still not completed the census. And then how can you help? I mean, look, the most important way, obviously you haven't filled out the census to fill it out immediately at my2020census.gov. But really what you could do in these 3 remaining weeks is email every person you know in New York City with the website my2020census.gov and ask them if they've completed it. Go onto your social media, whether it be Facebook, whether it be Twitter, whether it be Instagram, and put a message out letting people know, look, you've only got 3 weeks left. God, it couldn't be easier, and yet it affects the next 10 years of our city's future. So those are many ways to be involved. We certainly have volunteer opportunities. We've got phone banking, texting. So Arthi can post in the chat box many ways to continue to volunteer, but that is some of what we are doing. And so I'm, really delighted to be part of this forum, because I know it's really focusing on civic engagement across the board, but we think the census is one of the most important ways that New Yorkers can be civically engaged. So that is my quick overview of what we're doing, and really hope that everyone will join us in these remaining 3 weeks to sprint to the finish line and get the highest self-response rate we can for New York City. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here, Julie. Such an important evening for you, and just at the closing weeks and hours of this tremendous effort and this tremendous achievement that you've had in pushing us through this census in this very difficult time. Thank you so much for your service.
Thanks,
to the city and to the state. Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.
Best wishes.
Thank you.
And now I'm so pleased to introduce our final speaker of the night, Jose Perez, Deputy General Counsel of Latino Justice, PRLDEF, who's going to be speaking on working together to make cada vota cuenta, every vote counts.
Thank you, Catherine, and the City Bar for organizing this program, inviting Latino Justice, and really engaging with our young people. I salute you all for taking time out and participating in this program and learning, wow, what all this tremendous information. Why is this important, right? Gee, you just had Cardi B tell you, power, money, and respect. I mean, if you heard it right from the horse's mouth. What do we want? We want power, money, and respect, and this is how you do it. You make sure that your family has responded to the census. You make sure your friends, your neighbors, your classmates, everyone has responded to the census so that everyone is counted. And what else is you're going to all do? You're all going to be pre-registering or registering to vote, right? So you can exercise that right to vote and have a say in who this country's elected officials are. If you disagree with the gentleman in the currently occupying the White House and or his policies, then you want to have a say in who is going to be that representing. So make sure that you register, and you make sure your classmates and your colleagues and your peers all register. So as Catherine said, cada vota cuenta, that's Latino Justice's PRLDEF signature election protection project initiative. It's means every count votes. What is Latino Justice PRLDEF? We are a nonprofit civil rights legal defense fund founded back in 1972 as the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund. And we've been fighting for the civil rights of the greater Pan-Latino community here in New York and across the country. Now, when you talk about voting rights, and you heard some of the speakers earlier, I think, Hazel, you opened up, you mentioned Latino justice and fighting for voting rights. What does that mean? Some of you may remember the late, great Dr. Martin Luther King. I mean, we recently celebrated the anniversary of the March on Washington. And one of the big issues, of those of you who watched, got to see the film Selma, about a somewhat biographical account of his film and the fight to bring voting rights in the Deep South in places like Mississippi and Alabama and other southern states. Well, we don't always have to go to those southern states like Texas and North Carolina or Mississippi. We've had the same attempts here, even in places like New York and New York City, to seek to disenfranchise voters of color, communities of color. As a Latino civil rights group, that was formed in 1972 by 3 young visionary Puerto Rican lawyers, one of the first things they did was to challenge the literacy requirements. There used to be a requirement that you had to be able to read English. Well, here's a history and geography lesson or civics engagement lesson. In case you don't know, folks born in Puerto Rico where the primary language is Spanish, and that is what's taught what's called in flag schools. Everything is in Spanish. The ballots, the information, the registration is in Spanish. So you go vote in Puerto Rico, everything's in Spanish. You then relocate, and given all the economic issues that Puerto Rico has encountered and the natural disasters, Hurricanes Irma and Maria, and most recently the earthquakes, you have had many Puerto Ricans leaving the island. Well, even back in the 1950s and 60s, after World War II, many Puerto Ricans were coming and relocating here in the Northeast of New York. And so then when they went to register or try to exercise their right to vote, everything was in English, and they had to prove that they were able to write English. This is for those of you, I made reference to the film Selma, just gave an example. African-American voters in the South were challenged. Like, they had to know American history better than most citizens know it. They were dirtying what we call dirty pool or dirty tactics to disenfranchise or suppress efforts to exercise your right to vote. So that's why each and every one of you should do to make sure that access, what we call access to the franchise, is critically important. There are now provisions in the Voting Rights Act that was passed in 1965 that, you know, that mandate that state and local and county board of elections provide language assistance. There are different provisions. One, that if there are certain population thresholds that that occur, that again, that county board of elections has to provide language assistance. Anyone who's a registered voter can bring in someone with them, as long as it's not an employer or union official, to act as their interpreter. I don't know about you, but I remember going with my grandmother to help translate to her, and I was permitted to go into the polling site with her, and into the old days, the curtain booth, and help, grandma, abuela, here's what you got to do, hit the buttons and the levers. I know now we have modern technology, sometimes not for the better, that help us exercise our right to vote, but that's something that, I passed on to my son when he was growing up, the importance of going there, so that you're all taking part of this program. It's ensuring that we have an equal say and ability to access the franchise and cast our ballots. So please do that. Language assistance is critically important. And this is not just for Latinos, it cuts across the board. Language assistance, particularly here in New York City, we know we have this beautiful, gorgeous, multicultural mosaic. Every every imaginable ethnic group. You have Haitian, Creole, French-speaking folks in Brooklyn. You have Russian-speaking folks in Brooklyn. In Queens, we have a multitude of Southeast Asian and other Asian groups, Korean, Chinese, and other South Pacific groups. And so being able to exercise, once you become a citizen, if you become a naturalized citizen, or if you've been born here and you register to vote, is being able to exercise. You need to understand what you're voting for. And so that's, again, for Latino Justice's perspective, and those of our colleagues at the Asian American Legal Defense Fund, the ability to have language assistance and interpreter bilingual material so that you're able to knowingly and intelligently exercise your right to vote. The last thing I wanted to mention to all the young people out there is that Latino Justice also does what we call a lot of pre-law pipeline program. In the attachment of the program material and the resources for you, there's some information that Catherine was gracious enough and lovely to include there. It has information on our website, www.latinojustice.org. We have what's called our CAP Cesar A. Perales Leadership Institute, where we do a lot of pre-law pipeline program. So if you've been inspired by all the speakers you've heard here tonight, and you want to pursue, not all, but many of us are lawyers, and you want to pursue going to law school, and are interested, please go to our website, look at the programs we do. We'll be having our first virtual law day in October, so we're working on all the technological kinks, but you'll be able to speak to representatives from different law schools and learn the nuts and bolts of what it takes. It means, how do you successfully apply to law school? So again, I commend you all. This is a great thing. I just love that video from the New York City census counts. Cardi B said it all. Again, power, money, and respect. That's what we want. We want a seat at the table, we want to be included, and we want to be heard. Please make sure that you do everything in your power to make that happen. Siempre pa'lante. Gracias, mi gente.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us tonight, Jose, and thank you so much to all our speakers and our co-sponsors, especially to Shanice and Hazel, who helped organize this program. And I would just wonder if Shanice or Hazel, you have another comment before we close.
I'll go. I don't want to speak over you, Hazel, but I do want to thank everyone. This was such an informative event. Even for me, my work is, I'm very outside and removed from all the work that everyone here is talking about. So I personally learned a lot. So really, thank you very much. And again, please do not hesitate to use the resources that have been provided to you in the documents that we've sent to you. You can personally contact me, like I said. Definitely take advantage of these pipeline programs that I talked about, that Mr. Perez talked about. I don't want to go on for too much longer, but I, for one, actually did the Thurgood Marshall Summer Law Internship Program that I talked about earlier in 2005. I was a high school student, like many of you that are on this webinar, and now I'm an attorney on behalf of the City of New York with the New York City Law Department. So these programs really do work, but most importantly, go out, register to vote, do the census, share with your friends and family. But on that note, again, I don't want to take up too much longer. So thank you once again for joining us this evening as well.
And just, I'll add that you'll be receiving a link later this week or the beginning of next week to register for the League of Women Voters. We've tailored a very special voter registration drive training just for people who've attended this program. And for even if you haven't, if you want to bring some of your friends involved, we'll cover everything so that you can spend your September making sure that democracy lives. Okay? That's our job. That's our job for September, so that we can get everybody registered and we can get everybody to vote on November 3rd. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Catherine. You are a dynamo. Thank you so much, Shanice. And Carolyn, I want to work with you. You're fabulous. You know, Jose, as always, always. And thank you, Olivia. This is a wonderful evening. Thank you.
And thank you so much to all of you who attended tonight. And let's work together to get the vote out for November. Thank you so much for your time. Good night.